My name is Daniel Mercer, and desperation made me do something I'll never forgive myself for. When I stumbled across a late-night Craigslist ad one that promised a cheap room with no questions asked, I thought I'd found my salvation. But the moment I stepped inside that house, I realized I wasn't alone. And every night since, the basement door has been opening wider. And I don't know how much longer I can survive what's waiting for me at the bottom of those stairs. I never thought a simple late-night scroll through Craigslist would lead me into something so strange. It was one of those nights where the glow of the screen was the only light in the room, and I was half awake, half distracted, clicking through listings for things I didn't need. Used couches, second-hand bikes, furniture that looked broken, and half-written ads that made no sense. It all blurred together until one posting stood out. The title read, "Room for rent cheap, must occupy immediately." The word cheap grabbed me first. I'd been stressing about my living situation for weeks. My lease was expiring and every new apartment I looked at felt impossible to afford. My savings were thin, and the thought of crashing on someone's couch again filled me with dread. So the ad, in its simplicity, seemed like a small miracle. The photo wasn't anything impressive. A single room with pale, washed-out walls, a bed shoved into the corner, no sheets, no personal touch at all. The lighting was poor, casting odd shadows across the wall, and the angle of the shot was strange. It looked like whoever had taken the picture had done so quickly, maybe while half hiding behind the door. Still, I convinced myself it was nothing. Not everyone takes perfect photos for their ads. The description beneath the photo was even shorter. Cash only. Basement access included. Quiet tenants only. That was it. No details about utilities. No rules. No background check. I told myself it was just some landlord in a hurry. Maybe someone who didn't care about formality as long as they got the rent. I hesitated, staring at the screen far longer than I should have, but desperation made my fingers move. I sent a quick message asking if the room was still available. I expected silence or maybe a reply in a day or two. Instead, within minutes, my phone buzzed with an email. The message was unnervingly direct. "You've been approved. Come tomorrow night. Key under mat." That was it. No questions, no request for information about me. Nothing. My name, job references, none of it seemed to matter. It was too easy, too fast. But instead of being alarmed, I felt a strange sense of relief. Maybe this was just my luck finally changing. The next evening, I packed a few bags and drove to the address. The neighborhood was quiet, tucked away from the busy streets. The house itself was plain and unremarkable, the kind of place you wouldn't notice if you drove past. Its windows were dark, and there were no signs of life inside. For a moment, I wondered if anyone actually lived there at all. Sure enough, the key was waiting beneath the doormat, just like the message promised. My hand trembled as I slipped it into the lock, not out of fear but from the thrill of entering a new chapter of my life. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside. The air was stale, carrying a faint metallic temps I couldn't quite place. The walls were bare, stripped of any decoration, and the house felt empty, hollow. I found the room from the ad almost immediately. It was exactly as the photo showed. A bed in the corner, pale walls, and nothing else. No dresser, no lamp, not even a curtain on the small window. I should have been bothered by how bare it was, but I told myself I could make it my own. After all, I wasn't looking for luxury, just a place to stay. As I unpacked, I noticed the door across the hall. It stood out because of the 3 heavy locks bolted onto it. They were thick, reinforced, and all secured from the outside. My stomach tightened as I realized what that meant. The locks weren't designed to keep intruders out. They were designed to keep something in. I stepped closer, examining the wood around the locks. Deep scratches etched the surface, long and jagged, as if someone or something had tried to claw its way free. The marks were fresh, splinters curled outward, and flakes of paint littered the floor below. I froze there for a long time, my eyes fixed on those scratches. The silence of the house pressed down on me, so heavy it was almost deafening. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe an old storage room, maybe kids had messed with it, maybe the landlord had some strange reason for keeping it locked. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize, I couldn't shake the thought that something was behind that door, something that wanted out. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the faint metallic smell filling my nose. The house creaked and groaned like old wood always does, but beneath it, I thought I heard something else. Something faint, deep, and muffled, coming from the direction of the basement door. It sounded like movement, slow, dragging movement, and I couldn't stop staring at the ceiling, waiting for the locks to rattle. The basement door haunted me from the moment I woke up. Even in daylight, when the house should have felt harmless, my eyes kept drifting to it. The 3 heavy locks seemed larger than they had the night before, the scratches around them more violent in the morning light. I couldn't stop picturing what could have made them. It wasn't just the kind of random damage you'd expect from moving furniture or old age. These marks had direction, as if something had been working desperately from the other side, inch by inch, trying to escape. I made myself coffee in the kitchen, though everything about the space felt abandoned. The cupboards were nearly empty, with only a few dusty plates stacked inside, as if no one had used them in years. There was no hum of a refrigerator, no sound of life. I drank the bitter coffee in silence, trying to ignore the sense that the air was too still, as though the house itself was holding its breath. That night, things began to escalate. Around midnight, while I sat scrolling my phone to distract myself, I heard the faintest sound from the hall. At first I thought it was the old pipes, maybe heating or water running somewhere. But as I muted my phone and leaned closer, I realized it wasn't random noise. It was slow, deliberate, like something dragging across the floorboards beneath me. The sound came in intervals, as if whatever was making it was pausing, listening, then moving again. My heart began to pound, and I held my breath, waiting for it to stop. When silence finally returned, I convinced myself it was nothing more than rodents. Old houses always had rats or squirrels hidden in their walls. Still, when I finally tried to sleep, the sound returned. Only this time, it wasn't beneath me, it was closer. It came from the basement door. I sat up, staring across the dim hallway, my eyes fixed on the door and its locks. The sound was unmistakable now, a rattling scrape, as though someone inside was pushing against the wood. One lock clinked faintly against its metal clasp, like it was being tested. I didn't dare move. My breath caught in my throat, and I stared so hard that my eyes began to water. After what felt like hours, the sound stopped. The silence was worse than the noise, because it carried the weight of something waiting, something listening. I finally forced myself back into bed, though I didn't close my eyes. I left the small light on beside me, praying it would be enough to keep whatever it was from coming closer. When morning finally came, I tried to convince myself it was a dream. I left the room, determined to go about my day, but when I glanced at the basement door again, my stomach turned. The locks were all still in place, but the scratches had multiplied. Fresh gouges cut deep into the wood, sharper, deeper than before, flakes of pale paint scattered on the floor like shavings from teeth. By the third night, sleep became impossible. I lay in bed, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, listening for even the faintest sound. The air seemed heavier now, charged with a tension I couldn't explain. The metallic smell I had noticed before grew stronger, clinging to everything. It seeped into my clothes, my hair, my skin. It was inescapable, as if it had been soaked into the walls themselves. That night, I woke suddenly at 3 a.m. I didn't know why at first, but then I heard it again. The locks rattled. This time the noise was sharper, angrier, as if something was pushing harder from the other side. The sound filled the hallway, echoing off the empty walls. My whole body tensed as I sat up in bed, staring into the dark. I tried to tell myself it was just the house settling, just a trick of old wood, but deep down, I knew better. I could almost feel its presence behind that door, pressing, clawing, waiting for the moment when the locks would give way. I forced myself to creep into the hall, barefoot on the cold floor. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stared at the basement door. The rattling stopped the instant I arrived, as if it knew I was there. Silence smothered everything again. I stood there, too afraid to breathe, staring at the locks, waiting for the next sound. When nothing happened, I retreated slowly to my room, every step feeling like I was turning my back on something alive. I slipped into bed, heart pounding so hard it made my ribs ache. My eyes scanned the walls, searching for comfort in the silence. But instead, I noticed something new. Above my bed, carved into the plaster of the wall, was a long, jagged scratch I was certain hadn't been there before. It ran vertically from the ceiling almost to the mattress, deep and uneven, like it had been made in the middle of the night while I slept below it. I stared at it until my vision blurred, realizing what it meant. Something wasn't just behind the basement door anymore. Something had already been inside my room. By the time the fourth night came, I no longer believed the house was empty. Every part of it felt wrong, like it was watching me, like its walls carried eyes I couldn't see. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. Each second dragged out until the quiet itself became unbearable. And when the smallest creak or shuffle broke it, my whole body seized with fear. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head. Stress, lack of sleep, nerves from moving into a strange place. But the evidence kept stacking against me. My belongings were never where I left them. A shirt tossed on the chair would be folded neatly on the bed. Shoes I kicked off without thought were lined up perfectly by the wall. My bag, left zipped, appeared partially opened in the morning, as though someone had looked inside. I wanted to believe I was doing these things myself, maybe in some fog of half-sleep, but I knew the truth. I wasn't that organized, not even close. Someone or something was moving them. Every night, my focus always returned to the basement door. The 3 locks had given me a fragile sense of security at first, but that illusion cracked quickly. The night after the scratch appeared above my bed, I noticed one of the locks was gone. Just gone. The metal clasp dangled empty, as if it had been deliberately unfastened. Ties to remained, but the absence of the third made my stomach churn. It was as though I was watching something happen piece by piece, and I was powerless to stop it. I considered leaving right then, abandoning my bags and running out the front door into the night, but something strange stopped me. Not just fear, something heavier, like an invisible hand pressing me down, convincing me I couldn't go. Every time I thought about leaving, my phone would lose its signal, my car keys would vanish for a few hours, or my legs would feel too weak to move. It was as though the house itself didn't want me to go. That night, I stayed awake, determined to catch whatever was happening. I sat in bed with my back against the wall, the dim light of my phone screen flickering against my face. The hours dragged, but just past 2 in the morning, I noticed it. A shadow. It stretched across my wall, tall and narrow, its edges warped like it didn't belong to any shape I knew. My heart seized, and I froze, my gaze locked on it. I turned my head slightly to see what cast it, but there was nothing there. The room was empty. My hands trembled as the shadow grew longer, bending unnaturally, sliding toward my door. I couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body refused to obey. The shadow stopped at the door, looming over it like a stain of darkness seeping into the wood, and then the knob began to turn. Slowly, carefully, it twisted, the faint squeak of metal breaking the silence. I thought the door would swing open, that I would see something I could never forget, but the knob stilled. It stayed half-turned, waiting. I sat there, motionless, eyes wide, until the shadow slowly faded back across the wall and disappeared into the corner. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I stayed awake, my body rigid, staring at the door until the gray light of dawn crept into the room. When I finally worked up the courage to step into the hallway, I immediately saw it. The basement door had changed again. Only one lock remained. The other had been unfastened in the night. The floor beneath it was littered with new scratches, deeper and wider than before. Some of them weren't on the door anymore, they trailed outward, thin claw-like marks etched into the floorboards, pointing toward the hall. I stood frozen, staring at the trail of scratches, my skin prickling, my throat tight. The silence pressed in again, as if the whole house was holding itself still, waiting to see what I would do. I couldn't move, I couldn't even think. All I could do was stare at the single lock, still hanging on. One lock left between me and whatever was on the other side. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that it wasn't going to hold for long. The metallic smell grew thicker as the days dragged on, clinging to everything until it felt like I was breathing rust. No matter how many showers I took or how often I washed my hands, the scent never left. It wasn't just in the air anymore, it was inside me, sinking into my lungs, my skin, my clothes. Each breath carried the taste of something old and rotting, something that had been sealed away for too long. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of the basement door, of pale hands groping through cracks in the wood, of teeth gnashing in the darkness. Sometimes I dreamed I was locked down there myself, pounding on the underside of the door while someone else ignored my cries. I woke, drenched in sweat, my heart hammering, the echo of those dream screams still clawing at my ears. But dreams weren't the worst part. Reality was worse. The night after the second lock vanished, I sat in my bed with the lamp on, determined not to fall asleep. The silence stretched endlessly until it was broken by a sharp, metallic snap. It cut through the air like a gunshot. I knew instantly what it was, the last lock giving way. The sound echoed through the house, vibrating in my chest. My body froze, every muscle stiff with dread, as the door creaked open. Slowly, painfully, like it had been waiting for this moment. I could hear the groan of the hinges, the scrape of wood on wood, and then the heavy air shifted, carrying a cold draft down the hallway and into my room. I stared at the shadows stretching from the doorway, too afraid to move. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd felt before, so thick it pressed against my ears. And then, within that silence, came the sound of breathing. Slow, steady, heavy, not my own. Something down there was alive. I wanted to run, but my legs refused. My body belonged to the house now, and it forced me to sit there and listen as the breathing grew louder. It didn't rush out immediately, didn't charge into the hall. It waited, it lingered just out of sight, patient, as though savoring the moment. The hours stretched on. I stayed rigid, my eyes locked on the dark line of the open basement door, convinced that if I blinked, something would crawl into the hall, but nothing did. It just breathed, pacing, testing the air, never showing itself. By the time the first gray light of morning touched the window, I could barely move. My body was stiff, my nerves burned raw. But curiosity, or maybe something darker, pushed me into the hallway. My breath fogged faintly in the cold air. The basement door stood wide open. I peered inside, my heart lurching in my chest. The stairway descended into pitch-black nothingness. I couldn't see the bottom. I couldn't see walls, just endless dark, like the earth had split open to swallow everything below. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just part of the shadows, but then it moved. A figure crouched on the bottom step, its body bent unnaturally, limbs too long for its frame. It didn't look up. It stayed still, head bowed, fingers curled around the edge of the step, as though it were waiting for a signal I couldn't hear. I stumbled backward into my room, slamming the door shut and pressing my back against it. I stayed there until the sun fully rose, every second dragging like hours, waiting for it to follow, but it never came. When I finally dared to open the door again, the hallway was empty. The basement door was closed, but the locks were gone. All that remained were deep gouges in the wood, wide enough to slide a hand through. The smell of rust and rot was stronger than ever, seeping through the cracks. And as I stared at that door, I realized something terrifying. It hadn't come out because it didn't need to. It was already upstairs with me. I should have run the moment I saw the figure crouching on the basement steps, but instead I froze, as if my body had been claimed by the house itself. Every thought screamed at me to grab my bag, tear open the front door, and vanish into the night. Yet I couldn't. Something heavier than fear pinned me down. Something that whispered that I needed to stay, that I had already gone too far to escape. When darkness fell again, the house seemed even more alive than before. Every creak of the floorboards sounded deliberate, every groan of the walls like a breath being held and released. I tried to distract myself, scrolling endlessly through my phone, but the signal kept cutting in and out until it was nothing but a dead screen. I wasn't surprised anymore. The house had a way of severing every tie to the outside world. Just after midnight, a sharp vibration rattled in my pocket. My phone lit up for the first time in hours. I pulled it out, relief rushing through me until I saw the notification. It was an email. The sender, Craigslist. The subject line, room for rent occupied. My thumb hovered over the screen before I tapped it open. The message was short, just a single line. Thank you for moving in. Beneath the text was an attached photo. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was me, asleep in my bed. The blanket pulled to my chest. My face relaxed in the dim light. But I hadn't taken that photo and I hadn't been asleep. I was awake when it had been captured. Someone or something had been in the room with me. My breath caught in my throat and I almost dropped the phone. Then, another email arrived. The vibration buzzed against my palm, relentless. I opened it with shaking hands. This time the subject line read, basement access approved. The photo attached was darker, grainier, but I recognized it instantly. The basement steps. And at the bottom, the same crouched figure, its limbs twisted, its head bowed. Only now, it wasn't still. Its head was tilted slightly upward, as though it was looking straight at the camera. Straight at me. I dropped the phone onto the bed and backed against the wall, heart hammering so hard I thought my ribs would break. My eyes darted to the hallway. The basement door was closed again, but I could hear something faint, almost imperceptible, nails dragging lightly against wood, a rhythmic scratching that grew steadier with every second. I knew I had to leave, but when I stumbled to the door and gripped the knob, it wouldn't turn. The lock was gone, but the knob wouldn't budge, as if the house itself refused to let me go. I yanked harder, twisting, pounding, but nothing happened. Behind me the scratching stopped. Silence rushed in like a wave, and then the floor creaked, not from the basement. From inside the hallway. I spun around, my blood running cold. The basement door was open again. A draft poured from the blackness below, chilling the air. And in that dark doorway, I saw a movement, something crawling upward, slow and deliberate. Long fingers hooked over the edge of the step, pulling a pale, too-thin body higher and higher. Its head stayed low, the crown of it barely visible, greasy strands of hair swaying as it climbed. I stumbled backward into my room, slamming the door and pressing all my weight against it. My chest heaved as I tried to think, tried to plan, but all I could hear was the dragging of limbs along the floorboards outside. It was in the hall now. It was moving toward me. My phone buzzed again on the bed. I dared to glance. Another email. You are now part of the listing. The photo attached made my stomach twist. It wasn't the hallway. It wasn't the basement. It was me, again. But this time, I wasn't asleep. I was standing at the door, my hand pressed against it, my eyes wide with terror. It was a photo of me now, taken from the other side of the room. The scratching on the door began, slow, steady, deliberate, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. My legs nearly gave out as I pressed harder against the wood, praying it would hold. The buzzing of my phone grew frantic, dozens of new emails pouring in, each one with the same subject line, occupied. I don't know how many photos I saw flashing across the screen. Some showed me curled in the corner, others showed me clawing at the doorknob. One even showed me screaming, though no sound left my mouth. The scratching stopped. Silence fell again, but it wasn't empty, it was waiting. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear the smallest sound. And then came the breathing. Slow, steady, impossibly close. It was inside my room. The last thing I remember before everything went black was my phone buzzing one final time. The subject line of the email was different this time. New listing created, and beneath it, a photo of the basement door, closed, locked from the outside.